Yellow and Red Mix by Digits 27, Chapter 40. It was surprising to Naruto how little it had to be said before the three friends returned to exactly how things were before they left. Well, not quite how things were before they left. And Naruto couldn't tear his eyes away from Tayuya. Half the time, he was just astonished by how beautiful she had become. He noticed similar looks from the other guys as they walked through the streets and unconsciously moved closer to Tayuya, grasping her hand in his. If she noticed or cared, she didn't say anything, but the smallest of smiles tweaked in the corner of her lips. And they were all making their way back from the training grounds towards the Katsukage mansion, idly chatting about various interesting things that had gone on while they were all separated. Naruto was currently telling them about the Raikage's Iron Claw Jutsu, one that made Naruto shudder just thinking about it. In the time he had spent in Kumo, it wasn't just B who had received that particular punishment that earned him a round of laughs, especially from Gaara, who only knew the Raikage as the stoic and intimidating man he acted as while on business. The peace treaty between Suna and Kumo, and by extension Konoha, had gone through smoothly and without problem. Gaara would now regularly stand up for advice from A, who was more than willing to help out a young Kage, remembering when he had first been given the position after his father's death. Due to the nature of Tayuya's mission, many of her stories wouldn't exactly be considered funny, but she was able to tell of the few times she royally screwed the Katsuki over without them even realizing. She found out about the group during her 2 years, actually meeting with Satori and some of the other members a few times. She now had a perfect list of all the current members, including the wannabe Toby, as well as their targets. Naruto found it amusing when she informed him that he had dropped off the radar almost a year ago, and Itachi and Kisame had been assigned to Fu. It made him feel almost good that he had outsmarted the Katsuki, even if he didn't realize it at the time. He began to worry about Jujutsu when Tayuya told them about Hidan and Kakuzu, the supposed immortals of Akatsuki. However, having these descriptions was good. It gave him a better idea of who he was against, and now he could plan accordingly for each possible encounter. Already the cogs in his mind were turning, preparing him for those fights. What worried him most were the description of the leader of the Katsuki, the man that none of them had met and only seen by proxy through the magic body lantern technique. By the time they got back to the Katsukage mansion, it was already getting dark. The fight having lasted longer than either of them thought. They walked through the hallways as Tayuya and Naruto smiled, remembering their lives here. Fu just looked odd. She wasn't used to such luxurious trappings, even if Gaara personally disliked them. They were more for show, as a symbol of status. In actuality, he just let Matsuri deal with things like that. She was better and more willing anyway. I trust you to remember where your rooms were. He made sure to stress the words rooms, which elicited a blush from both Naruto and Tayuya. She had never truly had a room of her own, always sneaking into Naruto's. However, this time she set a smirk on her face and just turned to Gaara confidently. Yeah, but I think I'll stay in Naruto's room. Gaara actually raised an eyebrow, or he would have if he had any, and Naruto stared at Tayuya in a little bit of shock. Really, Tayuya? She just nodded with a smile, one that spoke of pain if he continued to speak about it and caused her more embarrassment. It was hard enough to admit even that much. Before he could do so, she grabbed his hand and started pulling him along the corridors, much to both Gaara and Matsuri's amusement. Fu spared a confused look between the fleeing couple and the laughing one before chasing after her brother. She caught up to them just as he was trying to drag Naruto into the room. Fu, I'm guessing you can have Tayuya's old room if she doesn't mind. The redhead just looked around, only just noticing the mint-haired girl's presence. That's all right, I guess. Fu smiled confusingly, not understanding why the conversation had suddenly become so awkward. Tayuya coughed loudly before letting go of Naruto's arm and turning around to Fu. Hi, I guess we haven't had a chance to talk properly yet, huh? Fu just smiled and stuck out her hand. I'm Fu Uzumaki, Tayuya chuckled while smirking at Naruto. Well, she's definitely been traveling with you for 2 years, shithead. Fu pouted a little, not sure whether or not to take that as a compliment or not. Why do you call me son shithead? Aren't you his girlfriend? Tayuya chuckled nervously, while her hand on the back, on her head. It seemed as if you spent enough time around Naruto, you picked up that trait. Yeah, it's complicated, but he knows I'm only joking. Naruto just nodded reassuringly from behind her back, and Fu just smiled sweetly. So, if Oni-san loves you, can I call you Oni-san? Tayuya brother caught in the back of her throat, and Naruto's eyes widened a bit at the question. Tio was positively shocked. She had barely met this girl, and she was already treating her like family. Tio had never had a proper family before, none that she would actually call as such anyway. I guess Fu just beamed before turning on a heel and vanished into the room across the hall. So Yuya was just left there gawking as Naruto put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right, Yuya-chan?" She shook her head. She shook her head at the shock and turned back to him as he could see her eyes begin to tear up. "Yuya, are you crying?" Her eyes opened wider, and she immediately rubbed her eyes free of the salty liquid. "What? Fuck no! I don't cry, so shut the fuck up!" She brushed past him into the room, and after a moment of curious hesitation, he followed her in. She was sitting on his bed, looking out the window at the view of Suna, stretching out into the distance. He walked over and sat down next to her, letting her lean her head on his shoulder. "She really meant it, you know. Fu's one of the nicest people I've ever met. Before me, there wasn't anyone she could trust. Now she wants to have precious people like her Oni-san." He chuckled at that, knowing how his words inspired her always warmed his heart. Tayuya just nodded, not taking her head off of Naruto's shoulder, but still not allowing the tears to fall. "I missed you, Tayuya-chan." She finally looked around, a small smile on her lip, and a genuine happiness in her eyes. "Yeah, I missed you too, Naruto." He smiled and gave her a soft kiss on the cheek, pulling away to see her face flush pink for a moment before she caught herself. Now that her attention was off of Fu, a devious smile that Naruto recognized too well graced her features. "So, how did you like those photos I sent you anyway?" Naruto smirked as well, happy that Tayuya was more or less back to her usual self. "Not nearly as good as the real thing," Tayuya cursed inwardly as she blushed again. Usually she was the one riling him up. "When did it get so easy for him to get under my fucking skin?" She finally managed to get herself under control and turned around only for Naruto to plant the kiss right on her lips. The one in the office had been a rush of the moment thing, passion brought about from not seeing each other for so long. This one was tender, more gentle and caring, and Tayuya found herself melted into the contact and not really caring about anything else. Naruto had missed the feeling of her soft lips pressed up against his own. It seemed to only have gotten better with time. Likewise, Tenyu was possibly lost in the loving interaction, so much so that neither noticed the small presence at the door to the room until she let out a small squeak. Both spun around, breaking the lip lock to stare at the young green-haired girl who was watching them with wild eyes. Fu, what is it?" The girl just squeaked again before scurrying off, closing the door behind her. Tayuya stared at the door for a moment before breaking out into laughter while Naruto looked sternly over at her. "Come on, Tayuya, that's not funny. What if we have been doing something else?" Tayuya stopped laughing and looked at Naruto, who looked back and blinking because he just realized what he had said. "Oh!" Her voice lowered slightly as she stared at Naruto with slightly lidded eyes, a suggestive smirk twitching up the corner of her mouth. "And what else might have we been doing?" Naruto's mouth just sort of went limp, hanging open as he was at the loss of words to say. "And well, it was just I didn't mean, I was just saying it." He found himself cut off from his inane rambling as Tayuya once again pressed her lips up against his own before detaching with a small girlish giggle, something Naruto had never heard from her. "Well, wow. Well, it's good to know you're as easy to manipulate as ever." She smiled impishly as the cogs in Naruto's head started turning again. "Hey, you tricked me." Tayuya just gave him an amused look that clearly said, "Yeah, and when were you expecting?" He just sighed in defeat before looking over at her with a new smirk, his practice side finally being given free rein. "Well, two can play at that game." Before Tayuya could ask what he meant, he launched himself forward, capturing her lips and pinning her underneath him on the bed at the same time. Tayuya was startled at first, but decided to beat Naruto at his own game. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, smiling into the kiss as she actually began to enjoy it. The smile turned into a shocked gasp when she felt one of Naruto's previous adult hands slowly trailing up her inner thigh. She moaned a little bit from the unexpected touch, but pleasant contact, and felt Naruto's mouth twist into a victorious smile without breaking the kiss. But by that point, Tayuya had stopped caring about whatever silly dominance game they were playing. She was too lost in the moment. Naruto didn't stop there. It trailed the soft patch up her smooth leg, lightly dancing across her skirt before skimming across her midriff with a feather-like touch. She hesitated a moment. His hand just itched away from her firm breast, unsure of how to continue. Feeling the primal need for the loving contact, Tayuya took a hand away from Naruto's Naruto's neck and guided his hand to her soft flesh. She moaned into his mouth again as, after a few seconds of uncertainty, Naruto began taking up a soft knee motion. Neither had broken from their passionate kiss yet, and neither particularly wanted to. The thoughts flashed through Naruto's mind. He really was at a blank for how to continue this. Everything they were doing felt amazing. His hand on her soft breast, her lips against his, and the occasional warm breath that escaped her mouth and rolled down his cheek. Soon he felt her hand tug the coat off over him, throw it to the side of the room before his orange shirt followed. Unfortunately, they had to break the contact for the annoying shirt to come loose, and Naruto took that time to gaze down at her body, the way her hair splayed out behind her on the bed, and just the lightest sheen of sweat adorned her forehead. He couldn't quite find a word to describe the look in her eyes as they passed over his exposed upper body, except hungry. She lifted her arms and Naruto got the message, removing her tight vest and mesh shirt as quickly as possible without ripping them. Not that either would have cared. At that moment, he gazed down at her torso now only covered by a dark red bra that made Naruto's eyes widen. Just looking at it, both of them gulped as Naruto looked at her before she nodded slowly, answering the unspoken question. Tentatively, or maybe reverently, Naruto unhooked the bra at the front, letting the two cups fall either side and reveal their bounty hidden within. Naruto wasn't sure what to make of it, except it was the most wonderful sight he had ever seen. Wasting no more time, he dove back down to Yo, pulling her into another passionate embrace as their tongue writhed between their mouths. But both just enjoyed the taste of the other. Naruto noted with a smile that you tasted how she smelled, and the cinnamon flavor carried over. His hand raised back up to carry her chest, to caress her chest. His fingers stopped for a moment when they passed over her hardened nipple, gaining him a small moan as to onto Yu's part. He smiled into the kiss again and took the small pebble between his finger and thumb, rolling it slightly to see what kind of reaction he got. Oh fuck! To Yu wasn't ballistic. Everything felt amazing, from the way Naruto's leg was rubbing between her thighs to his hand softly yet firmly playing with her nipple. Her body was on fire. As Naruto moved that intent, he'd only increased inside of her, collecting in her gut like water being held back by a dam. Naruto just continued his ministrations, making sure that the other breast wasn't left unattended as he brought his other hand up. Oh, Kami, Naruto! The Yo whimpered slightly when Naruto finally broke away from their kiss, only for her moaning to come back of full force as she felt something warm and wet to plant itself around one of her rosy buds. Naruto was curious about this, having read about it in Mega Paradise, but not really understanding it. He began to see why it was so well written about as he rolled the hard button around his tongue, listening louder and more heated moans from Taiyo now that she wasn't being muffled from his mouth. He came up from her breast, stopping his hand playing from her hand, earning a second whimper from her and a small smile from him. Toya gave him a confused and pleading look as he knelt up from the bed. She had never begged for anything in her life, but right now she was willing to swallow her pride if it meant more of these wonderful feelings. Naruto just quickly jogged over to the door and pulled out a seal from one of the pockets in his pants, slapping it onto the door before running back over. Privacy seal. You couldn't have cared less about what kind of seal it was. She just grabbed Naruto's hand and stuck it back down where it had been, gasping as cold air was replaced by warm breath. Taiyo was more than happy to oblige his girlfriend, sucking on her hardened pebble and rolling it about in his mouth and just enjoying the unique expression. She gasped again as the cold air suddenly attacked the wet nipple when Naruto quickly switched breasts. Taiyo couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed his head and brought him back up into a searing kiss that took both the breaths away. After another minute of passionate making out, Naruto finally parted again, beginning to plant small but loving kisses across her jaw, onto her neck before trailing down her body. He passed down through the valley created by her breast, leaving a small trail of saliva in his wake. That by the time he had reached her waist, was beginning to pull in her navel. Instant again, he stopped, staring at the point where soft, creamy flesh became the red material of her skirt. Looking up at her again with questioning eyes through the valley of her breast. Talia bit her lip and nodded. If she waited any more, then she felt like she was actually going to explode. Dr. carefully unzipped the garment, letting it fall off to either side until Talia shuffled, and he was allowed to pull it out from under her. Next, he stared at her tight-fitted spandex shorts before hooking his fingers through the waistline and giving it an experimental tug. Slowly, he peeled out off the tight piece of clothing, pulling it down her legs in a manner that made sure that you felt every feather soft movement. When he finally pulled them off, he couldn't help but give a cheeky kiss to use toes, smiling when he heard her yelp in surprise from above him. Finally, he trailed back up her legs in the same manner he had her stomach, planting soft and quick kisses further up her leg until he was moving down the valley of her thighs. Finally, he stopped, his eyes widened and his eyebrows quirking at the lacy pink piece of underwear Tayo wore underneath her shorts. To say he was surprised that she was wearing such a feminine piece of clothing was an understatement. He actually looked up from between her legs to see her blushing as he stared at the only thing between him and her womanhood. Hurry the fuck up and do it, shithead. It was supposed to come across as strong and forceful, but it came out meek and pleading, too cute for Naruto to say no to. Skip lemon. Both were suddenly shocked from their pleasurable embrace by an enormous explosion ripping through the air outside. Toyu wasn't quite lost to her visceral side enough to ignore such a blatant noise and looked up curiously as multiple explosions lit up the night sky. She also noticed the large white bird flying around while somebody riding it battled endless waves of sand. Deidre! It was more of a shocked whisper, but Naruto caught it. His eyes hardened and his lips forming into a grimace. He lifted himself off Tayu's prone body and threw on his coat, not finding time for anything else. Tayu, stay here. If he sees you, then your cover in the Koski will be blown. Tayu couldn't argue right now. She had difficulty moving her arms from the nerve-wracking expression she had just gone through. She panting on the bed as she continued to stare up at the battle raging on high above. The village Asgard valiantly fought for both himself and his village. I'm going to fucking kill that asshole for ruining my reunion with Naruto. Naruto rushed through the halls of the Kasakage mansion, skidding through the hallways that he knew from memory until he was outside. He stared up at the sky as it was lit up in explosions after explosion against Gaara's indestructible sand. He had to find a way to get up there to help him, but this was an aerial battle. He had no way of flying. A grin lit up his face when he realized that wasn't true. He took a deep breath and prayed that he had enough materials for this. He unsealed a single Fujin no Iki kunai and threw it up into the air as high as it could go, which was fairly high considering his strength. Once it reached the apex of its climb, Naruto quickly flashed to it, grabbing it as soon as he appeared. In one fluid motion, he launched the kunai again in mid-air and quickly flashed again. He shouted out in joy when it worked, and he managed multiple flashes in quick succession. Now that he knew it worked, he repeated his process further towards Gaara's battle, and three flashed the blonde later. He was right next to his friend who made him a floating platform without even thinking about it consciously. Gaara, how you doing? The stoic sand user didn't turn as he continued to manipulate his large streams of sand through the air in such vast quantities it made him look like he was ripping the desert apart. Naruto had never seen him use such control before, nor hold such large amounts of sand in the air while simultaneously manipulating it in more and more complicated maneuvers in an attempt to hit the flying artist. He is proving difficult to strike and contain due to his bird. Naruto just smiled and nodded. Get rid of the bird. Gotcha. A little boost would be appreciated. Gaara just nodded, and in an instant the sand standing on the sand Naruto was standing on launched him forward like a little bullet straight into Deidara's path. The enormous clay bird veered out of the way, but Naruto threw his kunai faster and embedded it into its soft side. In a flash, he was on top of the bird, surprising its blonde rider. How the hell did you get up here? Naruto smiled innocently before punching the man square in the face to capitalize on his shock. Unfortunately, Naruto's hand passed straight through the man, and not in the good way. His fist was suddenly surrounded in clay as he heard an ominous and deadly hissing from beneath him. Acting on pure instinct alone, he threw out a kunai in any random direction and flashed to it, hoping he was far enough away from the blast. He wasn't. The edge of the shockwave caught him in mid-air, knocking him so that he went spiraling through the air, clutching his shoulder. Luckily, a soft blanket of sand awaited him before he dropped too far and cushioned his fall enough that he wasn't squashed flat. The sand brought him around to where Gaara still hadn't moved. Well, I got rid of the bird, and Gaara smirked, but quickly pointed down to where another clay bird was weaving through the streets of Suna, complete with another Deidara riding on its back. You got rid of a bird. Naruto just scowled as he looked at the Iwa missing in and dodged wave after wave of sand. How much clay does that guy got? And Gaara's face just hardened with resolve. Not as much as I have, Santa. With the near imperceptible narrowing of Gaara's eyes, the sand pursuing the crazed bombers sped up, nearly scraping along the clay bird's tail. Feathers. The effeminate man seemed shocked by this and veered off into a side street which just so happened to be blocked by a large wall of sand with sharpened spikes. He swerved back up into the air where Naruto was now waiting for him. He dropped down off of the sand platform and tried to grab onto the bird's wings. Deidara managed to swerve away, but not before Naruto was able to lightly brush the wing, and that was all he needed. With the mere thought, he instantly transported himself to Deidara's position. This time he successfully grabbed onto the wing and used it as a leverage to pull himself around and smack the Iwanin in the back of the head with his foot. This time he struck lucky, and the blonde was sent hurtling off his own bird with a surprised look on his face, which turned into a frown as his hands formed a seal. Maybe this will get you to appreciate my art. Naruto already knew what was coming and had jumped away in time to avoid the worst of the explosion. Okay, this is getting really annoying, he cursed as he watched Deidara sail by on yet another bird while he fished out another kunai to launch at him. This time the bomber had wised up and began to weave violently so that Naruto couldn't get a lock on him or a kunai close enough. Instead, he followed Gaara to catch him with the stand platform and took a few seconds to catch his breath, using the Fuji no Iki so often was really starting to take its toll, and it was times like these that he wished he had wings like Fu. He took a deep breath and clutched his wrist, creating as large a Rasengan as he could without it blowing up in his face. It turned out that it was fairly large, about half the size of himself. He quickly attached the few chakra thread and began slowly spinning on the sand platform faster and faster. He let the Rasengan out of his hand, and it swung around him like an enormous and deadly hammer toss. He kept gaining speed, but never lost sight of Deidara as his pseudo flail sped up until he was a bright blue circle in the sky. Rasengan Mesa! All in one instant, he let it go. The deadly sphere of energy launched out at impossible speed, connecting with the clay bird and shearing straight through one of its wings, causing Deidara to lose balance and nearly fall off. Instead, he just put his hand down and fed more clay into the bird, repairing the wing so he could come out of the nosedive. Unfortunately for him, he forgot the blazing ball of energy right behind him. He was promptly reminded when it burst apart in a bright display of fireworks that tore through the man and his bird like paper. Naruto huffed heavily as he dropped to one knee. The control he had exerted over that Rasengan was tremendous. He sighed deeply as he heard a chuckle far behind him, only to turn and see yet another Deidara astride yet another bird. Oh, Kami, damn it! Where are you getting all this clay? Deidara just smirked from his position on the hovering bird. Ah, but an artist never reveals his secret. He smiled more deviously, even as his hand gorged on the clay on his satchel. I'll admit your art was impressive and brilliant, but doesn't quite have the simple flair and creativity that mine does. Naruto didn't know what this guy was talking about. What did art have to do with any of this? Unfortunately, he didn't get a chance to ask, as the man quickly formed something in his hands before a few dozen little birds appeared in front of him. Naruto was too tired to dodge fast enough. As the exploding birds came closer, he closed his eyes and hoped Gaara had enough time to block the explosion with his hand. Something did block the explosion, but it wasn't a wall of sand like Naruto had expected. Then he saw a flutter of green wings before a body dropped from the sky. Foo! End of chapter 41.